The circular economy is an economic system that's an innovation engine that puts the back into resources. It allows for continuous benefit to be provided to all generations by the reuse of things, of material, energy, water, by designing things that can become useful over and over again. This is the largest business opportunity ever seen by our species. And the leaders in the economic future will be people who understand that by design, we can create perpetual assets and optimize them to create businesses that thrive and are enjoyed by people everywhere, all the time, forever. Why would we want to miss that? We see two nutrient cycles today. One is the biological nutrient cycle, which is the ancient one of life itself, but the other is probably about 5,000 years old, which is technical nutrition, when we started, chipping rocks or banging metal. So if we start with the biological nutrient system, these are things that come from life and go back to life. So if we look at the biological cycle of fabric, we could design it instead of what we saw in the early 90s, where you saw wool and Ramey blends that would have their trimmings declared hazardous waste by the Swiss government, and they had to be sent to Spain for burial or incineration because they couldn't be buried or burned in Switzerland. We can redesign that to eliminate the concept of waste. So in the case of textiles, we'd redesign the textiles to become trimmings that are mulch for the local garden club and grow strawberries, and the water coming out of the textile mill is as clean as Swiss drinking water. This reduced costs by 20% and allowed a textile industry to stay in Switzerland. That is designed for the circular economy. On the other hand, there are technical nutrients, the camera that takes this, or the computer that you're watching this on. These are technical nutrients. These are materials that we can design for endless reuse. A really fabulous example of technical nutrition is aluminum. In the last 150 years, pretty much 75% of all the aluminum made by humans and used is still in use. And so it is exactly what we talk about in technical nutrition. It can be a window, it can be a piece of furniture, and it's valuable, it's collected, it's reused ad infinitum. That's a great example of a technical nutrient. Engaging with circular economy by design is fascinating. If we look at different sectors, we realize that a lot of people will say, this is a very interesting theory, but how does it work in practice? Buildings that I get to do, because I'm an architect, is design the River Rouge plant for Bill Ford, where we replaced hard asphalt roofing with green roofs, the largest in the world, but we ended up saving Ford $35 million in capital expense day one over conventional stormwater management. For business people, this is a 1-minute decision. Another example would be in the furniture industry. We see the companies like Steelcase and Herman Miller designing for disassembly where all the materials are designed for reuse, because this way we harvest yesterday's products for tomorrow's products. In personal care and home care, we see companies like Aveda and Method in personal care, and then soaps and things like that, where all the materials are designed to be safe in the water as they're used, safe on your skin, and even the packaging is considered as nutrients for the next cycle of packaging. So we can add all kinds of products to these lists, and just about any company can engage with these issues in a very profitable way. Peter Drucker, the management consultant, pointed out in 1984 in his book, The Effective Executive, on page 1, that it's a manager's job to be efficient and do something the right way, but it's the executive's job to do the right thing. Executives can work from their values to produce value. And one of the problems, as we see today, if you only start with numbers and value, you can go to tactics, you can go to strategies and set measurements and goals, but you're benchmarking. And your business may be changing while you weren't paying attention, and you're benchmarking against yesterday instead of advancing into tomorrow. So we find that it's very powerful for executives to start with their values, because you've gone beyond benchmarking to what does the future look like that you intend, and how do you design into it? And then we give it to the engineers and produce the value. So let's say you're a CEO and you want to join the circular economy. What do you do? Well, the first thing is to take an inventory and see what it is you're doing and understand which parts of it are not good and which ones are good and where you want to go. And then we're going to articulate what we do want for the future. And you're going to do both at the same time. Let's get rid of the things we don't want. Let's increase the things we do want. And my goal is 100% fabulous. That is what executives can do. That's leadership.
L'Open Innovation. Pivot Power est une multiprise déformable qui permet de brancher plusieurs adaptateurs secteurs. Produit vedette de Quirky, une plateforme Internet dédiée à la co-création de produits par les particuliers. C'est un lycéen, Jake, qui l'a conçu avec l'aide de 709 contributeurs de la communauté. En moins de 2 mois, 400 000 exemplaires sont vendus et 350 000 $ de bénéfices pour Jake. Qu'est-ce que l'Open Innovation ? Une nouvelle façon d'innover basée sur la collaboration entre entreprises, leurs fournisseurs, leurs clients et avec la diffusion du numérique, les usagers. Mais comment ? Et qui capte la valeur économique ainsi créée ? Examinons les éléments de réponse au travers de 3 formes d'Open Innovation. L'Open Innovation entre plusieurs entreprises. Dans le contexte économique concurrentiel du début des années 2000, l'innovation intensive et la création de nouveaux produits et marchés devient un impératif économique. Pour accélérer le rythme de l'innovation, les bureaux de R&D des entreprises s'ouvrent aux idées des projets d'innovation d'autres entreprises. Par des mécanismes outside-in, ils achètent des brevets, des licences, ou par des mécanismes inside-out, comme la création de spin-off. Il existe aussi d'autres formes d'ouverture, telles que des partenariats entre entreprises de secteurs différents. C'est à ce moment-là qu'Henry Chesbrough, professeur à l'université de Berkeley, commence à parler d'Open Innovation. En 1998, la Smart est mise sur le marché. Coproduite par l'horloger suisse Swatch et le constructeur allemand Mercedes-Benz. Il s'agit d'une stratégie win-win de partage de la valeur, créée par le succès de ce nouveau concept de voiture. 2008, Apple lance l'App Store. C'est une des premières plateformes bifaces. À travers sa plateforme, Apple vend à ses clients des contenus développés par d'autres. Producteurs de musique, de films, éditeurs et développeurs de logiciels et de jeux. Apple s'ouvre à d'autres acteurs sans ouvrir sa technologie. Les applications de l'App Store ne fonctionnent en effet que pour les terminaux Apple. C'est son business model qu'Apple ouvre. Les entreprises et développeurs indépendants fournissent des contenus qui accroissent la valeur de l'iPhone en tant que bien système. Apple leur reverse une partie du chiffre d'affaires tiré de la vente des applications. Et le mouvement d'Open Innovation va s'étendre aux consommateurs. À travers le concept de lead user, Eric von Hippel, professeur à la MIT Sloan School, souligne le passage d'un paradigme schumpeterien d'une innovation centrée sur les producteurs à une innovation portée par les utilisateurs. Ce type d'innovation ouverte va être démultiplié par Internet. Des communautés d'utilisateurs qui innovent, collaborent entre eux et améliorent leur production dans une logique de diffusion en peer-to-peer. Par exemple, le kitesurfing est un marché créé par des amateurs de sport de glisse qui étaient très performants en termes de design et innovants au point que les entreprises se sont résolues à n'être que des prestataires de la fabrication de leurs modèles. En 2001, Procter & Gamble lance le programme Connect et Développe, emblématique du crowdsourcing. Une stratégie qui permet à une entreprise, à travers un site web, de faire appel au grand public, à la foule et à son potentiel de créativité. Les prestataires amateurs sont récompensés ou rémunérés si leur idée est retenue par l'entreprise. Procter & Gamble externalise ainsi l'activité et les coûts des phases de créativité. L'entreprise bénéficie d'autres externalités positives de la plateforme. En effet, et les internautes votant pour désigner les meilleures idées, Procter & Gamble minimise le risque d'échec inhérent au lancement d'un nouveau produit. Par ailleurs, les idées novatrices des internautes constituent des bases de données utiles pour les services de R&D et de marketing. L'implication des internautes participe d'une économie de la contribution spécifique à l'Internet. C'est-à-dire, les échanges d'idées et de données sont le fait de contributeurs amateurs qui, pour la plupart, ne sont pas rémunérés. Un travail invisible, un digital labor, qui pose la question aujourd'hui sans réponse de qui capte la valeur ainsi créée. Dans ces formes d'open innovation, lead user et crowdsourcing, l'utilisateur innove et le producteur produit. Mais l'utilisateur peut également financer l'innovation. 2009, lancement de Kickstarter, plateforme de crowdfunding ou de financement participatif. Son fonctionnement est simple. Un créateur de projet présente son idée, fixe un objectif de collecte de fonds, une date limite et définit une récompense pour les soutiens des internautes investisseurs. Soit un don modique, un objet, une entrée gratuite pour un spectacle, etc. Soit une participation aux fonds propres de la société créée ou un prêt rémunéré. Enfin, Kickstarter prélève un pourcentage des fonds collectés. Conclusion. Le numérique, à travers ses sites web, ses plateformes d'échange, a démultiplié les possibilités d'ouverture des processus d'innovation, permettant l'échange d'idées, de services et d'argent. D'aucuns y voient une démocratisation de l'innovation, d'autres, un nouvel esprit du capitalisme.
My name is Brigadier General Terry Williams, Assistant Deputy Commandant for Installations and Logistics for the United States Marine Corps. And we're developing a conceptual framework for how we will support the Marine Air Ground Task Force of 2025 and beyond. In today's Marine Corps, we're in the midst of what we call an evolution in logistics affairs. On the one hand, our current inventory of aircraft, vehicles, and weapons is more lethal, more maneuverable, and more survivable than at any other time in our history. Yet on the other hand, these systems are heavier and more logistically intensive. To solve our logistical challenges of the 21st century, we need your ideas and feedback. Now let's take a look at what warfare was like in the 20th century.
Inching through swamps and jungle ambushes on their bellies, supported by the damnedest concentration of three-dimensional firepower you ever saw. The long toms, ships, air power. We threw it at them and kept it going.
Today and in the future, Marines will be fighting in 5 domains: air, land, and sea, as well as space and cyberspace. As we look into the 21st century combat operations, the logistical challenges have increased exponentially. The equipment is heavier, harder to maintain, and consumes more fuel. In World War II, vehicles like the iconic Jeep weighed only 2,400 pounds and got 16 miles to the gallon, while the new Joint Light Tactical Vehicle will weigh 18,000 pounds and get less than 6 miles per gallon. Other modern platforms, like the CH-53K, MV-22, and the F-35, each offer exquisite warfighting capabilities, yet each will require logistics concepts and capabilities that ensure their potential is maximized. We believe we are in an era of hybrid logistics. We will still have to move large quantities of fuel, water, and ammunition throughout the battle space. However, unmanned platforms, 3D printing, and predictive supply and maintenance have the potential to optimize tactical distribution, modernize the supply chain, and increase equipment readiness. We envision a flattened supply chain with 3D capability arrayed in key forward operational and tactical locations, ready to manufacture good enough parts for emergent operational requirements. In the medical realm, we are looking at the use of unmanned platforms, both sea and air, to move patients to medical facilities. Other initiatives include the introduction of polymer ammunition, robotic dogs, and exoskeletons that will reduce the load on the individual Marine in the fight. We want each Marine to become a producer rather than a consumer of logistics through advanced water filtration systems, solar panels on packs to charge batteries, and even devices that can capture the energy generated by Marines' movement in the fight. Lastly, and most importantly, we will need logistics Marines in each element of the Marine Air Ground Task Force who are educated, trained, and mentored in a way that increases their proficiency in multiple logistics disciplines, incentivizes innovation, and rewards initiative. Hybrid logistics, the blend of old and new methods of sustaining Marines in combat, will require the logistics community that questions conventional wisdom without ignoring the realities of the modern battlefield.